Hayward right now leads the team with 134 tackles for loss. TJ Watt now with one more yesterday has 131. So they're 3 apart. They started the season out 6 apart. All right, welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. This is our post-game look at the various games. So I'm going to do something different. It was suggested to me over the weekend, and I thought I'd give it a shot. Instead of doing 2 long podcasts, which do run almost an hour and 40 minutes at least, because I try to do 8 games in each one, or 7 to 8, depending on the day. But instead of doing 2 long podcasts, what I'll do is just do a bunch of short ones, 1 podcast per game, put the podcast out that way. And then that way, if you want to just hear your game, you can. If you want to listen to all of them, you just listen to podcast after podcast. As long as you're subscribing to the podcast, you won't have any problem listening to every game being reviewed. So we'll give that a shot. On Wednesdays, I will still stick to my standings and stats episode, which I'll cover the standings for the entire NFL and who's leading the NFL in stats, whether it's for real stats or fantasy stats. And we'll look at that on Wednesdays. So that podcast doesn't run as long anyway, but we'll do that for Wednesdays. But on Monday, Tuesdays, I'll put out the podcast for every individual game. And then on Thursday, Friday, I'll do the same thing, except it'll be the pregame, looking at the games coming up on the weekend. So we'll give that a shot, see how that works, and we'll just go from there. All right, so the first game up in this format is the game in Dublin, Ireland, between the Minnesota Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers ended up winning this game 24-21. They had it pretty much wrapped up. It was 21-6 by the end of the third quarter, but Minnesota did make a valiant effort to try to come back and get back into this game, but they came up short by a field goal. So now this series is now tied 10-10 between these two teams. The Steelers are 3-1, and the Minnesota Vikings are 2-2. All right, so let's look at the top 10 for this game. In this game, Justin Jefferson only needed 4 yards to move into a third place all time for the Minnesota Vikings in receiving yardage, and he got 126 in this game, so big game for him. So he now has 7,758 yards. He passed Anthony Carter, who had been in third at the time. Now, next up for him, which probably will not be this season, is Randy Moss for number 2 all time. So Justin Jefferson is pushing his way up this list. But Randy Moss has over 9,300 yards, so Justin Jefferson needs almost 1,500 yards. Not that it's impossible, but that's quite a bit of yards to do in 13 more games. So he may not quite reach Randy Moss this year, but he should be able to catch Randy Moss early next year. Another top 10, and this is the continuing battle in the Steelers' defense between Cameron Hayward and TJ Watt, both active. Hayward right now leads the team with 134 tackles for loss. TJ Watt now with one more yesterday has 131. So they're 3 apart. They started the season out 6 apart, and TJ Watt is continually whittling away at Cameron Hayward. But those two, both great players, but at some point, I do think TJ Watt will catch him. That is it for the top 10 in this game. All right, let's look at the game. Like I said, this game, Pittsburgh seemed to have it under control pretty much for the game. They were leading 14-6 at halftime and then 21-6 by the end of the third quarter. And then all Pittsburgh could manage after that was another field goal, while Minnesota put up 15 points in the fourth quarter to make it close, but still they came up short. So let's look at the team stats here. Minnesota did have more first downs, more yards. They had 23 first downs to Pittsburgh's 19. In net yards, Minnesota had 372. Pittsburgh had 313. So both of these, Pittsburgh defense did play much better than they had prior to this game, but they did give up 313 yards. Now, time of possession, Minnesota had it for 33 and a half minutes to 26 and a half for Pittsburgh. So a big edge for Minnesota, but they still were not able to do much with it, not enough to win. And when you look at their third and fourth down, part of it is that they went for it on fourth down 3 times, made it twice, but their third down percentage was 4 out of 14, only 28% on third down. So they had a tough time there. All right, let's look at the individual players. We'll start with the quarterbacks. Carson Wentz for Minnesota was 30 out of 46 for 350 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 big interceptions. And he was sacked 6 times. He had a quarterback rating of 84.5. His big problem is he hangs onto that ball. He's just waiting for maybe the perfect pass or is just not sure. I'm not sure which way to go, but 6 sacks is just too many times. And it knocked him out of key situations where he did not need to be sacked. Now, looking at these 2 quarterbacks, their passing route trees and so forth, Carson Wentz did throw the ball down the field over 20 yards 5 times, had 2 completions, 1 for a touchdown. He had 97 of his 350 yards were over 20 yards. Did have a lot of dump offs behind the line of scrimmage, but most of his passes, he definitely had more passes, I'll say this, between 10 and 20 and definitely over 20 to 30 than Aaron Rodgers. I think Carson Wentz definitely, that's why he gets sacked so much. He's trying to throw the ball down the field, and it sometimes costs him. On the other hand, Aaron Rodgers just throws these little darts over and over and over, and he was 18 for 22 for 200 yards, 1 touchdown, had a quarterback rating of 119.7, was sacked twice. He did have an 80-yard touchdown pass, but that was on a pass that was just over 10 yards, and it was really the DK Metcalf, I believe it was, ran it in for the touchdown. So it wasn't, Metcalf. It wasn't the length of the pass. In fact, he threw only 3 passes over 10 yards, completed 2 of them. One was that he just hit Metcalf right up the middle, and off he went. It was such a quick dart. But he had no passes over 20 yards, didn't even attempt any. And almost all of his passes were down the middle or to the left, which is interesting. The only passes he threw to the right side of the field were behind the line of scrimmage. He was 4 for 4 on those, but every other pass was down the middle or to the left side of the field. Interesting. And 0 passes, like I said, over 20 yards. Didn't even attempt a pass that long. He's, like I said, 18 for 22, but it's like he hikes the center hikes the ball and he throws it. It's immediate. He's incredibly fast in getting rid of the ball. So those are a look at your 2 quarterbacks. Very different styles. Carson Wentz has the opportunity for big plays, but it also costs him with the sacks. All right, let's look at some of the other stats in this game other than the quarterbacks. All right, let's look at the running backs in this game. For Minnesota, Jordan Mason, 16 carries for 57 yards. He looked good initially, and then as they had to come back, less attempts, and his yardage, he only averaged just over 3.5 yards a carry. No touchdowns rushing. Just wasn't that good of a game overall. Like I said, he seemed to start out fairly well, but then as they got away from the run, Pittsburgh pretty much shut it down. Now for Pittsburgh, Warren was a late scratch, so he didn't even play, but Kenny Gainwell came in, had a very good game. Big game for him. 19 carries with 99 yards rushing. for a 5.21 yard average. He had 2 touchdowns in this game. Big game for him. Filling in also was Caleb Johnson, the rookie, 6 carries, 22 yards for a 3.67 yard average. He was serviceable. That was about it. And but Kenny Gainwell had a big game. All right, looking at the wide receivers, Justin Jefferson for Minnesota had a big game, 10 catches on 11 targets for 126 yards. No touchdowns, but he did have the 10 receptions. So in fantasy, if you're playing PPR like I do, that's a decent game out of him. The surprise here was Xavier Scott coming out of the backfield, 6 catches, 43 yards. 1 was a touchdown. So he had the touchdown. Mason did have 3 catches for 15 yards. So he did touch the ball 19 times in this game, not for a lot of yards and for no touchdowns. That hurt a little bit. Jordan Addison was back. This was his first game back after suspension. Huge game for him. Only 4 catches. He was targeted 8 times, but on the 4 catches, he had 114 yards. So it was a big game for him. 1 was an 81-yard pass. He ran quite a ways. He was caught from behind by a great play by one of the defensive players for Pittsburgh. Chased him down, linebacker, super fast. I was so shocked that Addison was chased down from the angle that the defender had to chase him from. But he had no touchdowns, but he still had a decent game for his first game back. And you can see that they're going to try to feature him as well as Jefferson. 8 targets for him, and Jefferson had 11. Hawkinson, the tight end, 4 catches, 39 yards, no touchdowns. He was targeted 5 times. Even Adam Thielen comes in, and his 2 catches for 11 yards, but his catches were for first downs. He is such a heady player for finding the open spot just enough to make a first down, and he did it twice. Only targeted twice, and both were for first downs. Now, looking at the Steelers, Gainwell, like I said, had a big game. 19 carries in the game, plus 6 catches, 25 touches in this game. He had 35 yards to add to his 99 rushing yards. Big game for him. We'll see how it goes when Warren comes back. If it's a split backfield, how much Gainwell will play, or if he'll go back to being second guy. It'll be interesting because he had such a good game. Anyway, 6 catches for him for 35 yards. DK Metcalf, big game, 5 catches on 5 targets. One of them was that 80-yard touchdown run that he had, mostly run after the quick catch. But he had 5 catches, 126 yards. Now, and a touchdown, like I said. This game, they made a conservative effort. Only 5 catches. Aaron Jones only had 18 completions. He only threw the ball 22 times. So DK Metcalf had 5 of the catches, and then Kenny Gainwell out of the backfield had 6. But right off the bat, almost the very first pass was to Metcalf. I should look it up, but I'm pretty sure that it was. They definitely made an effort to get him, and he had a nice catch right over the top of the defender, reached right above him, grabbed it, and hung on to it. He's fast, and he's incredibly fast for such a big, muscular guy. Darnell Washington had 3 catches for 20 yards. Calvin Austin had 2 for 13. So the only touchdown was to DK Metcalf as far as passing goes. All right. Now, looking at the defense for the 2 teams, for Minnesota, Wilson, the inside linebacker, had 5 tackles, 4 were on assists. He had 1 tackle for loss. Like I said, Rodgers gets rid of the ball so fast. So they did not have a quarterback hit in this game. That's incredible, honestly. No sacks in the game. He's just hard to get to. But that's his style. You know, he was actually sacked twice. I'm sorry. He was sacked twice, in this game, but, for 18 yards. So he was sacked a couple of times, but he does make it difficult for them. So let me look at these stats over here. All right. It was Jalen Redmond, for Minnesota, had both the sacks. It's pretty interesting. One guy had both the sacks. In fact, he only had 2 tackles, 3 total. He had 1 assist, but 2 sacks. So big game for him as far as that went. But other than that, no one really had any big numbers for Minnesota. Now for Pittsburgh, a couple of players had huge games. Peyton Wilson, and not your typical who you would think, TJ Watt and so forth. Peyton Wilson, 13 tackles, 8 solo, 5 assists, 13 total tackles. That's big. And then Patrick Queen also, he had 11 tackles himself, 8 solo, 3 assists. I mean, that's almost double. Deshaun Elliott was next. He had an interception. Deshaun Elliott had an interception, and he had 6 total tackles. TJ Watt did come through. He had an interception. Not what you typically see out of him, but he did have an interception in this game. So that was impressive. Usually he's up there rushing the quarterback, but he was able to tip that ball and get an interception. He also had, like I said, that tackle for loss in this game. He had a sack as well. So he had a tackle for loss, sack, and an interception. Only had 5 total tackles, but he spends a lot of time being double teamed and so forth, which does open it up for other players. Now, Nick Herberg had 1.5 sacks, as well as Keanu Benton also had 1.5 sacks. So the sacks got spread around quite a bit. Like I said, Patrick Queen had 11 total tackles. He also had a sack in this game. So big game for him. He had 3 tackles for loss. Pretty impressive. Wilson had 2 tackles for loss, along with his 13 total tackles. So big game there. All right, that is a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings, with the Pittsburgh Steelers coming out ahead in this game in Dublin, Ireland, the first game ever there, and Pittsburgh wins it 24-21. All right, that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. Stay tuned for the next team's next game that I look at. Also appreciate it if you subscribe, like this podcast. You can find it on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. Of course, you can also find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most every other podcast source that you might use. So that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats. Until the next one, I'm out.